Hi everybody, welcome to Great Books, Big Ideas. I want to do another walkthrough video in my continuing series about the great ideas today. And this was a series of supplements to the Great Books of the Western World published by Encyclopedia Britannica. We're up to 1968, a very fraught time in American and Western civilization. Lots going on in terms of political changes and dissent, protest, upheaval, civil rights movement, anti-war movement, all of that, some of which is reflected in the concerns covered in this volume. Let's head over to the document cam and breeze through the great ideas, 1968. Okay, here's our title page, 1968, with an illustration, Politics in an Oyster House, oil painting by Richard Catton Woodville of 1848. You're going to find politics as a big theme in this particular volume. No wonder, given what was happening at the time. We start with a symposium in part one, Ideas and Politics, and we have a lot of participants from sort of like the old guard of like liberalism in American politics. Here's Senator Eugene J. McCarthy, who actually is not talked about here, but he ran for president in 1968 in that campaign. Didn't he win the New Hampshire primary? And then shortly after that, Lyndon Johnson said he wasn't going to run for re-election. And that opened up the field, and Senator Robert Kennedy ran for president in that season, and in the spring of '68 he was assassinated after winning the California primary. But McCarthy made a huge splash early on. As I recall, I mean, I was too young, I was only 3 or 4 years old at the time, but like learning the history of this, I think he was a big anti-war candidate, and had a lot of like fleeting popularity, but it looked like Kennedy was maybe going to get the nomination. But then, of course, when he was killed, it just threw everything into chaos, and you had that very tumultuous 1968 Democratic Convention in Chicago with the police riots and Mayor Daley and all that nonsense. And out of that, a very injured Democratic Party nominated Hubert Humphrey, the Vice President of the United States, as their next nominee, and he went on to lose in a three-way race to Richard Nixon. Governor George Wallace of Alabama was also an independent candidate in that race. So anyway, it's interesting to see McCarthy crop up here in the Great Ideas today. And his article is about reassessment. There's a lot of cool photography, as usual, in these articles. McCarthy here talking about the need for men of ideas, politics and morality. And then we move on to Ted Sorensen. Ted Sorensen worked for Kennedy, JFK, a political heavyweight. Politics and Dissent. It says also here that he was presidential campaign advisor to Senator Robert F. Kennedy. And I don't know when in 1968 this volume was published. Did it come before RFK was assassinated or after? Anyway, Ted Sorensen's weighing in on politics in America. And then we have Richard Rovere, magazine editor and writer. A member of the board of editors of the American Scholar, Political Ideas in the United States. anti-intellectuals. Well, that's something we're dealing with these days. Never seems to go away. Are Americans indifferent to ideas? Here's a photo of burned out Detroit after the riots of 1967. So much civil unrest happening in the 60s. And these later volumes of the 60s and the great ideas today are grappling with that. The broker in ideas. Next in our symposium is Arthur Schlesinger, another big name in history and politics. Intellectuals in American politics. The scholar statesmen of the Revolution. What happened to them? There's Ralph Waldo Emerson, John Quincy Adams, Andrew Jackson. The return of the intellectuals. There's Wilson, Roosevelt. And this is Robert Frost, who read at the inauguration of JFK in 1961. Intellectuals' hostility to politics. And then we conclude that symposium. Next up is the year's developments in the arts and sciences. They don't cover every discipline every year, so we'll see what they cover this time around. Well, we have poetry, another symposium on contemporary poetry. And these are all poets in their own right. Louis Simpson on the New American Poetry. James Dickey on the self as agent. Stephen Spender, The Vital Self and Secondary Means. Let me know if you're familiar with the work of these poets and what you think of them. These symposium articles this time around are not that long, but we do get a nice sampling of their poems, which is nice. A little anthology of contemporary poetry. There's Dickey and Simpson and Spender. Nice. Now we move on to biology, the new biology and the shaping of the future. This is by John R. Platt. As I recall, having read this volume a few years ago, this was a pretty well-written overview article of what was happening in biology. Talking about technology and lots of issues, the development of man, the range of life, the molecular basis of life, brain and behavior, higher human processes, the lock-ins and social structure, developments ahead. Let's see what he thought were going to be developments ahead. Genetic copying of animals. Contraceptives in foods. Regeneration of organs. New channels of personal communication. Reshaping biology. Then we move on to world structures. And the end, a short biography of scientists discussed in the article. Next up is a long article on archaeology by Leonard and Cottrell. And he covers a lot of ground in this one. Here is the some maps too. So the Mediterranean cradle of civilization. Here's your Fertile Crescent. A lot about Egypt, transformation of Egyptian hieroglyphics, mummies, artifacts. We move on to the Bible lands, Jordan, Syria, Israel, and Lebanon. stuff that was found by the Dead Sea. Masada, the Jericho Tell, the Hittites, and this is cuneiform tablets. One of the first writing systems. Greece, relics from Mycenae. New techniques. Here's Jacques Cousteau, I guess doing some underwater archaeology in Great Britain. Here's Hadrian's Wall. And then so much down here in southwest England, Stonehenge, Avebury, Glastonbury. Next up in our annual reviews is John Plamenatz, Some American Images of Democracy. Not a lot of illustrations in this article. I remember this was a little bit stale, but it was a while ago that I read it. But it's a long article on democracy, and political equality comes up. But you're going to see that come up later. In fact, right now. So here we have the contemporary status of a great idea. So in the original great books that you had a syntopicon of 102 great ideas, so-called, and it was just used as an indexing tool to make your way around the great books. You can trace the development of a great idea throughout history or what different major thinkers have to say about it. And now the contemporary status of a great idea takes up an idea that actually wasn't one of the 102 great ideas, and that is the idea of equality. One wonders why it was left out. But here they are trying to do it justice. Equality did appear in the inventory of terms in the syntopicon. So one of the keys to using the syntopicon is not to just look at the major ideas, which is a pretty arbitrary list of 102 ideas, but these ideas are cross-referenced and have related terms, and equality does show up under other great ideas, including quantity, same and other, democracy, justice, tyranny, citizen, labor, liberty, love, and revolution. So you can find out something about equality in the old syntopicon, but this article is supplementing that, giving it a little more intention. Okay. Different positions. And nice, healthy bibliography, too. So it's appropriate that equality would be mentioned at this point in American history, 1968, what with the voting rights, civil rights legislation, and the protests of the times, people really trying to gain their rights and become more equal in society. It's a good fit for 1968. Now we go to additions to the Great Books Library. So when I read these Great Ideas Today volumes, I do skip over the additions to the Great Books Library. These are shorter works, sometimes excerpted or selections that are supplements to the Great Books of the Western World. So they're saying here, these belong in that library, and we're devoting some space each year to these editions. one of these days or years, I'll get around to reading these. A lot of these I've already read elsewhere in different editions, but I do like to cover them on these walkthroughs just so you see how they were trying to expand the list of great books. And this was one way they had to do it. So we have Selected Prose and Poetry of William Wordsworth. Now, of course, he's best known as a Romantic poet, but his preface to the Lyrical Ballads is one of the foundational documents of Romanticism. So that is really worth reading. He transformed the meaning of lyric poetry in the English language. And here is a small selection of his poems. They don't cover all the highlights I would like them to cover, but they do get a few of the biggies. Here's Tintern Abbey, one of his best. The Lucy poems, Resolution and Independence, some sonnets. A small sampling, but enough to get you started. And then we move on to, this is a figure I don't know as well at all, Walter Bagehot, Physics and Politics. He was a Victorian, and apparently this work had the subtitle, The Thoughts on the Applications of the Principles of Natural Selection and Inheritance to Political Society. Now that could be very interesting, but also very dangerous. So I'm not sure where he heads in this article. If anyone is familiar with this work, let us know what it's all about and what you think of it, whether we should read it. It's a pretty long work. Then we move on to a book I have read in a different paperback edition called The Abolition of Man by C.S. Lewis, of Chronicles of Narnia fame, famous Christian apologist. He's a really good writer. And this is an extended essay. I would say this one's worth reading. And that's it. So that is The Great Ideas Today, 1968. Grappling with a lot of the political upheavals happening. You're going to see that continue in the 1969 volume, because 1968, and I think this probably went to press before the SHIT really hit the fan in 68, where America really wasn't the same after 1968. And we're still dealing with the aftershocks of those earthquakes that happened. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that little walkthrough of 68. I'll include a link to an online edition of this. If I can find it, it'll be in the show description. But please make your comments too. If you have questions or if you've read some of the works, what are your thoughts about this particular volume or what was happening in the 1960s at the time? Love to hear your comments and questions, and hopefully you'll chat amongst yourselves too. So anyway, thanks for watching. We'll see you again very soon. Bye-bye.